Hey there folks, so welcome to Spectrum Pulse. We talk about music, movies, art, and culture. And today we're finally going to be talking about the full-length debut from CyHi The Prince called No Dope on Sundays. So this is one of those debut albums where I can see people being kind of shocked in 5 to 10 years that it took this damn long to come out. Hell, there was a few cynical folks that said the hype would never properly pay off and we never get a proper debut. But for those people who have been following CyHi The Prince and a lot of his fans, it must have felt like we should have got this record years ago because of all that hype. He was signed back to Def Jam in 2009. He got a co-sign from Kanye West and signed to Good Music a year later in 2010, where he contributed to My Beautiful Dark Twisted Fantasy. He had credits on Cruel Summer and a lot of writing credits on Yeezus, all the while he continued to churn out mixtape after mixtape, and with his Black History Project tapes, he even notched some real critical acclaim, but where was the album? Well, I'm not gonna say I know all the answers here. There's apparently some label confusion and he eventually wound up getting dropped from Def Jam altogether, but you know what? I did take the opportunity to go back through all those mixtapes, and to my shock, I was a lot less of a fan than I wanted to be. And believe me, that came out of nowhere considering I like his flair for the dramatic and his very real charisma, and he also tended to have good taste in textured and interesting samples, and his hooks more often than not went pretty big. But the more I listened to his mixtapes, the more I got the impression of an MC that had a lot of bluster and a lot of hard words for people not following the right and respectable path under God, and yet a fair bit of evidence that he himself wasn't always towing the straight and narrow either, especially in some of his attitudes around women, for which his excuses felt pretty thin. Now, this is not an uncommon predicament for artists who want to be heralded as leaders in hip-hop, as CyHi The Prince plainly does. But artists like Kendrick Lamar and Big Crit, they're always intensely critical and introspective, digging into their own potential for hypocrisy and what their failures mean, and reflecting on their experiences to refine some of their most nuanced and compelling work to be a leader. With CyHi The Prince though, look, the seeds were there, but especially on the second Black History Project mixtape, the messaging and hypocrisy started to ring a lot more sour to me. But hey, maybe now that we've got a full-length commercial debut clocking in at a whopping 72 minutes, we'll have all the room we need for that deeper introspection to really make things click right. They really brought everything home here, right? Well folks, look, I wish I could say I like this album more, because there are a lot of seeds of an interesting debut project here, but entirely like too many major label debuts before him, from Pusha T's My Name Is My Name to Vic Mensa's The Autobiography, it feels really quite compromised, diminishing the parts of CyHi The Prince's appeal that hooked me from the mixtapes, and spreading them way too thin across an overlong record that leans on its message that has grown a lot less and less tolerable. I'm not gonna call this a bad record, it's really not, but I will say, as someone who wasn't even really a huge fan of the guy to begin with, I can call it pretty disappointing, and I'm not sure how fans will react to this. And I think some of the conversation, it really has to start with CyHi The Prince himself. And again, I normally like this guy, at least as a technical MC. His flows connect, he's got the sort of consistent skill I can like and respect, he's got some fairly detailed rhymes, and while there are points I think he could afford to flow a little bit more aggressively and bring a little bit more intensity, he certainly carries himself with an authoritative presence that can be appealing. Up to a point. Now we'll get into this more when we talk about more of the content, but what caught me more off guard were the obvious concessions that he was clearly making to the mainstream trends that don't remotely fit with his style. Why, for instance, are we getting blatant auto-tune on Moving Around with Schoolboy Q utterly phoning it in, or on Looking for Love, or the hook of Free, or that ugly flattened vocal pickup on Dat Side with Kanye, and really his verse wasn't that good either. And that's not counting the points where CyHi The Prince tries to yank his voice into a higher register, like on the odd whooping flow of the title track, or how he tries to make his awkward cracking delivery on Trick Me work, and it just sounds like he probably should have gone home for another take when he was feeling a lot better, to say nothing of trying to force 2 Chainz into a more staccato flow that doesn't remotely fit him. Now look, that's not saying that all the guest stars fumble here. Estelle, she's fine enough on Murda, but I will say I liked her a lot more in that last De La Soul project. I think I was the only person who liked it. Both BJ the Chicago Kid and Jagged Edge, they contribute some decent R&B inflected vocals on their songs, and Travis Scott, well, he does his thing on the closing track, almost to the point of overwhelming it. He's really more of a presence than CyHi The Prince is. But you know what? The absolute standout was Pusha T on the title track, who delivers a very straightforward, remorseful, and surprisingly affecting verse to close out the song that might just be my favorite verse on this entire album. He really went above and beyond there. And it's important to describe why that verse works so well. What Pusha T gets to on this record is subtext, and and depth, with a level of expressive subtlety that the more I listen to CyHi The Prince's verses, the less I heard of it. Sure, you get your fair share of corny punchlines, but that doesn't nearly bother me as much as the framing and presentation of a lot of this content, where CyHi The Prince takes upon the role of hip-hop's respectable prosperity gospel preacher, complete with an album intro that opens and ends the psalm with 12 commandments for the streets and numerous samples of a gospel preacher that are interspersed throughout the record, including Bible passages. Now, I'm not saying this couldn't work. The integration of more gospel into hip-hop in recent years has been kind of intriguing, and with the right subtext and framing and a willingness to dive deeper into religious iconography or explore the complicated morality of gangster rap, there is a lot of potential for real drama here. And I can't help but feel that CyHi The Prince misses the mark and refuses to capture any real deeper spiritual vibe, most because of his own sense of internal morality seems remarkably inconsistent, and his conviction can step over the line into feeling hectoring with a lot of greater depth. He preaches not to rob or kill people, except when he and his crew do it on later songs, with the sort of thin excuses that show either a lack of greater moral consideration or a refusal to actively target the system with the same vigor that he brought to the first Black History Project. And what gets actively exasperating is, for as detailed as his drug-running come-up stories can be, there's a serious lack of deeper introspection or self-examination of what he's doing. And when you choose to use so much religious iconography and framing around this record, the blatant hypocrisy starts becoming pretty intolerable, with the feeling that if any personal or religious code is being followed, and that's a big if, it's the letter and not really the spirit of it. And it gets particularly exasperating when he writes about women. Yes, speaking from the perspective of the unborn child questioning the mother's decision on 80s Baby is an interesting take, even if it is a little bit presumptuous on what she should be doing. And I don't mind the expanded metaphor behind the girl on the sleepy free as she's representing the record label. Still not a good metaphor, but fine. But between the ugly condescension of that second verse of God Bless Your Heart, especially near the end, or how the self-aggrandizing looking for love, how that feels, it intensifies that sour feeling of unforced ego that he feels he knows exactly what is best for these women, and really, he doesn't treat them all that well to make that comparison. And that can also lead to some weird lyrical choices, like how on New Africa, which is about how wealthy Black people in the United States can rebuild and reinvigorate the motherland in their own image, and there's promise there. And there's a sense of utopianism reinforced by Ernestine Johnson's monologue at the end of the song, and yet CyHi The Prince spends his second verse focusing more on the African girls with big tits that he's looking to nail. Classy. But okay, even despite framing that I find frustrating and some exasperating lyrical choices that somehow manage to undermine even that, maybe the gospel swell could redeem some of it if we get a few of the big, expensive hooks that you would expect out of a good music record, right? Well, there certainly is an emphasis on big, as all but 2 of the songs run comfortably over 4 minutes, and while you could definitely question whether that was a good idea when the lyrics feel as surface level as they do, it feels a little bit spread thin, if the samples and the hooks were strong, that'd be fine. And yet, for a lot of these hooks, I'm just not all that impressed. I think some of it has to be used with how these gospel samples and how these soul samples were used. I know it's just my personal preference, but if I'm going to get gospel swell in hip-hop, there needs to be something to emphasize some sort of edge or intensity or fervor. The rough-edged yet gorgeous swell of Kanye West's Ultralight Beam with Chance the Rapper, or even Chance the Rapper's Organic Warmth on Blessings, or even just the rough-edged firepower we got on Big Crit's last project with songs like Keep the Devil Off. And yet with No Dope on Sundays, I'm not hearing that fire or bite. We got opulent and expensive samples that stumble under the weight of their own significance, like with Living Inside Your Love that's already been sampled by J. Cole and Tupac, or on songs like Murda and Closer that are so heavily reliant on their samples for any real bite that they don't really rise above their influences. Now, that's not saying that some of the production doesn't have texture or good melody. I dig the horns and the swells of organ behind a lot of God Bless Your Heart, and increase the gospel vibe behind the warm grit of the title track, the scratchy, bass-heavy New Africa, the muted keyboards, and the deeper knock of the beat behind 80s Baby. And that sample switch up on Closer, that was pretty great. It's one of the better songs here. But on the flip side, for as much texture these songs can have, you get the seedy keyboards of Dat Side, or the very muted trap stutter of Moving Around, and none of it has much punch or momentum, not helped by songs that can let the outros and samples really drag on the back half. But as a whole, look, I don't dislike this album, but I also can't deny how flat and stodgy and frustrating it can feel with a lot of its content, lacking the punch and depth that CyHi The Prince has delivered at his best, and replacing it with mainstream compromises, inconsistent moralizing, although that was present before, and production that seriously has started to drag on me. It's a pretty dry record, but doesn't really have the lyrical depth in order to justify it, and it's not colorful or fiery enough or loaded with the sort of hooks and firepower that, say, Big Crit brought with Forever Is a Mighty Long Time, which is even longer, but is a much easier listen to take in because it had more diversity and variety and better bass lines and grooves. As such, you know what, man, I should be a lot harder on this, but CyHi The Prince is a good enough rapper that I'm giving this an extremely light 6 out of 10, and only really a recommendation if you're a fan of this guy that you want to see the hype pay off, and even then, I cannot promise that you'll be convinced it's worth the wait, because it's not really better than the first Black History project. As it is right now, I'm not sure this is worth the wait, but hey, give it a look if you're curious. So yeah, thanks a lot for watching. I'd like to like and subscribe, I'd be more than grateful. I know some of you guys are going to be annoyed by this review. Folks, I wanted this to be better, but it does feel like a mainstream compromise. You gotta admit that. If you want to buy it though, links in the description below, and I got the poll up there for all you to tell me how wrong I am. Looking forward to the comments there. Beyond that, if there's anything else I might be able to do to improve my presentation, I'm all ears. And if you guys want to get involved in my scheduling process and support this channel, link to my Patreon is right over there, where 3 times a week you guys get to vote on my schedule, and once a week for the higher tier contributors, you guys get to add albums, movies, or even a top 10 list to that schedule. More details right there, but till then, I'm Mark, you're watching Spectrum Pulse, and I'll see you next time.